We have taught CISM classes collectively for over 20 years, and we see tons of people make very similar mistakes in how they approach studying and the exam itself. We put a few of the really common mistakes into a free guide, and of course, also how you can avoid them. You can download it from the link in the description.
Risk management. This is super important in security. We as security professionals have a colossal challenge. How do we best protect all the assets across an entire organization? We never have unlimited budgets or an unlimited amount of time available to perfectly protect everything. So how do we best protect the assets within the organization given our limited budgets and time? One super useful method to help us figure this out is risk management. Risk management is an essential component of any comprehensive security program, as it enables organizations to prioritize their security efforts and allocate resources effectively. Risk management is a fundamentally focused element on the identification, assessment, and prioritization of risks, and the economical application of resources to minimize, monitor, and control the probability and impact of those risks. At the 10,000-foot level, it's helpful to think about risk management comprising of three major steps: asset valuation, risk analysis, and risk treatment. Let's go through these steps. Starting with asset valuation. Asset valuation is conceptually incredibly simple. Assign a value to each asset. In other words, figure out how valuable each asset is to the organization so that we can rank the assets from most on down to least valuable ones. Simple idea, but super hard to do in practice. There are two major ways that we can rank assets: quantitative and qualitative analysis. Quantitative analysis is where we assign monetary values to each asset. We say this asset is worth $1 and this asset is worth $2.7 million. Quantitative analysis is absolutely the preferred method. We would ideally love to assign a nice dollar value to every asset. Unfortunately, for the vast majority of assets, that isn't possible with any reasonable amount of accuracy, that is. Can you confidently say in your organization that your reputation is worth $400 million, or that this data is worth exactly 23,855 pesos, or this critical application is worth 13.476 million euros? No. For most assets, we absolutely cannot assign a monetary value to them. We may know something is valuable, but assigning an exact dollar value is highly improbable. And that is why the vast majority of the time we use qualitative analysis to rank assets. Qualitative analysis is simply a relative ranking system where you compare assets and say, well, this asset is more valuable than that asset, while this asset is less valuable than that one. You rank assets with relativity of what one is worth to the other. And you often create categories like high, medium, and low value and sort assets into these categories. Once you have completed asset valuation, you will have a nicely ranked list of assets. And it is now time to move on to step 2 of risk management: risk analysis. Risk analysis is where you identify the risks associated with each asset. To identify and understand the risks associated with each asset, you need to look at 4 things: threats, vulnerabilities, impact, and likelihood. Threats are any potential danger. They are events, situations, or actions that have the potential to cause harm or damage to an organization's assets, operations, or reputation. Threats can come from a wide range of sources, such as natural disasters, cyber attacks, fraud, theft, or human error. A useful tool we can use to help systematically identify the threats related to an asset is threat modeling methodologies. There have been many different threat modeling methodologies created over the years, and there are 3 that you should know about in particular. STRIDE is essentially the quick and easy one, but not necessarily the most thorough methodology that you can use to identify threats. For the exam, make sure you remember what the initials mean. So for example, S stands for spoofing, T stands for tampering, which is a violation of integrity, and so on and so forth. PASTA, the process for attack simulation and threat analysis, is the super time-consuming but very in-depth methodology for threat modeling. Essentially, it's a 7-step risk-centric methodology. PASTA provides way more useful results, and it takes into account the business value of assets, compliance issues, and provides a strategic threat analysis. So, STRIDE is the quick and easy way of systematically identifying threats, while PASTA is the very time-consuming methodology that produces way more useful and nuanced results. The third methodology that you should know about is DREAD. DREAD is different than STRIDE and PASTA. DREAD is not used to identify threats, but rather it's used to prioritize a list of threats that have already been identified. STRIDE and DREAD are often used together. The former is used to identify the threats, while the latter is used to prioritize the identified threats. The next major piece that we need to look at as a part of risk analysis is vulnerabilities. A vulnerability is a weakness that exists. Vulnerabilities are weaknesses or gaps in organization security or control systems that can be exploited by a threat to cause harm or damage to the organization's assets, operations, or even reputation. Two techniques that can be used to systematically identify vulnerabilities are vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, which I'll talk about in detail in the second MindMap video of Domain 6. Likelihood or probability is simply the chance that a particular risk event will occur. It is a measure of the likelihood of a potential risk turning into an actual event. And the final piece we have to look at to fully understand a risk is the impact. Impact refers to the potential harm or damage that could result from a particular risk occurring. Impact is essentially whatever bad thing is going to happen to the organization as a result of risk occurring. Downtime, reputational damage, data integrity violations, a breach, ransomware, the list continues on. Alright, so as a part of risk analysis, we are going to come up with a giant list of risks. We need to rank these risks to figure out which risks are of greater or lesser concern. There are two techniques we can use to rank the risks: quantitative and qualitative analysis. The same techniques we talked about earlier for ranking assets. Quantitative risk analysis is where we try to calculate exactly how much a given risk is going to cost the organization per year. It's super helpful if we can calculate this, as it makes it much easier to determine what controls are cost justified to put in place to mitigate a risk. There's a very easy to use formula which you can use to calculate how much a risk is going to cost the organization per year. It's known as the ALE calculation, the annualized loss expectancy calculation, and you definitely need to use that in order for you to be effective. To calculate the ALE, you first need to calculate the SLE, the single loss expectancy, which is simply how much is a risk going to cost the organization if the risk occurs once. To calculate the SLE, you multiply the asset value times the exposure factor. The asset value is simply what the asset is worth, and the exposure factor is a percentage that represents what portion, if you will, of that asset are you expecting to lose should the risk materialize. Exposure factor, for example, of 10% means that you expect to lose 10% of the asset should the risk occur. An exposure factor of 100%, on the other hand, would mean that you expect to lose all of the asset if this risk happens. So, to calculate the single loss expectancy, you have to multiply the asset's value with the exposure factor, and that will tell you how much it's going to cost the organization if the risk occurs just once. But of course, the whole point of doing this and using the ALE formula is to calculate how much is the risk going to cost the organization annually. So we need to multiply the SLE times the ARO. The ARO is the annualized rate of occurrence. That represents how many times per year you expect a risk to occur. If you expect the risk to occur once per year, the ARO will be 1. 5 times per year, the ARO would be 5, and so on and so forth. So it's a very simple formula that we would love to use at all times, but unfortunately we can't, because the 3 simple numbers we need, the asset value, the exposure factor, and the annualized rate of occurrence, are often totally impossible to determine with any sort of reasonable accuracy. And that is what forces us to use qualitative analysis most of the time. It's exactly the main reason. Like I said before, qualitative analysis is a relative ranking system. It's not amazing, but a whole of a lot better than nothing. Which brings us to the third step of risk management, risk treatment. Treatment is where we figure out how to treat the risks we've identified. Do something about them, that is. This is very important, and we will cover it in a separate mind map at the end of this domain. Moving on to risk management frameworks, which provide a structured and systematic approach to managing risks within an organization. This is another rather large topic which we will cover in the same mind map as risk response. And that is an overview of risk management within Domain 2, covering the most critical concepts you need to know for the exam.
In case you didn't have a chance to get it just yet, remember to get our free guide on some of the most common mistakes people make when studying for the CISM. You can find the link in the description, and we'll see you in the next mind map.